No. My folks are from, my dad is from Iowa, my mom is from Minnesota, and my grandfather moved up from Iowa to Minnesota because his sons could not have property down in Iowa. It was just too expensive. So he moved up to Minnesota, and he was there for a few years, and then he decided to move to Montana, and that was because the railroad had a program where they were trying to get people moving out here, and they offered free trips to settlers coming, or potential settlers to come out to Montana to take a look. And then they came out here, and my grandfather said this is an ideal place for his 4 sons and 2 daughters to come and move to because there's land available. And this is in 1928 when the program was engaged, and they came out here in fall of 1928. And then in 1929, of course, some things started happening, 29 and 30, and it became the so-called the economic decline of the entire country, called the Great Depression. I don't know what the difference between a Great Recession and Great Depression is, because I think we're in a Great Recession right now, and we may be heading somewhere in that direction, I don't know. But after we lived in a place outside of southeast of Baker, in a place that was not far from a small country store, and that store was called Willard, and it was like going up a driveway up the hill. And I remember my mother telling my dad in December, or in January of 1932, it's time, Richard, it's time to move, or to take me to the hospital. This was on January 4th. They got out in the car, and it was snowing. It was like a blizzard, and he had to let down fences. It was not a car, it was a Model T truck. That's what he drove to Baker. Drove her to the hospital after several hours letting down fences and getting through the snow. And I was not born until the 7th of January. So that meant from 3 days of being in the hospital without me being around. Then I was born, and then I know that I was taken back to the farm, of course, and which was called a ranch at that time, but I call it a farm, or farm ranch. And I remember my mother's turkeys. She always loved to have turkeys, and that was one thing that I remember. And I had a dog, I forget the dog's name, but it was a dog that I just dearly loved. And in 1935, things just got so desperate financially, and it was when the grasshoppers came on a day in the early summer, late spring. They ate my mother's garden down to 0. She always kept the garden out in the backyard. She said, Richard, it's time to move back to Minnesota. So he said, okay. So they got in a Model T truck after a few days of getting ready to go and drove back towards Minnesota. There's no interstate highways or anything like that. It took about 7 or 8 days to get back to Minnesota in a Model T truck. I remember when we drove down to the first stop was a neighbor down the road to get a cab for the truck. The truck did not have a cab, and the neighbor had a cab that he was willing to give my dad. And we stopped at this place. It was about 40 minutes down the road, and opened the door, and a dog jumped out of the truck and just ran down the road and disappeared. It was going back home. We don't know what happened to it, but we didn't turn around to get it. So when we were driving back through the prairies to Minnesota, we were, at night, we would stop, not at a motel, because there were no motels to stop at that time. We stopped where we could to sleep at night. I remember one night we slept at a place where they watered and fed cows, and there was a roof overhead. I also remember looking up at the stars. The stars were so bright at that time. You could see every star in the sky. Now you look up, you cannot see any stars at all hardly. I remember the Milky Way. So we got to Minnesota, and then that's where I grew up on a farm in southern Minnesota. And it was 1 mile north of a little village called Heartland, or it was about 14 miles north of a place called Albert Lee, which is the intersection of Highway 90 and 35 now. And eventually I graduated from grade school, went into high school, and then I said, Dad, should I stay on the farm? He said, no, I think you should go on to school. So I went to Grinnell College for 2 years in Iowa, because my dad was from that area. And then I transferred to the University of Minnesota, and I became a geophysicist for an oil company. I graduated a degree in geological engineering, petroleum option, and then I went to work for Texaco for many years, and then I graduated, well, gradually moved on from there. I retired in 1992, which is a long time ago. But that means I was born in, I just had a birthday, I'm 80 years old. I was born on January 7th, 1932, and that's about the size of it.